Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
And I'm Nicole Reiner. And announcing FNMC Presents, an album of previous commissions and competition winners performed by members of the Flute New Music Consortium. Repertoire includes works by Sean O'Pevolo, Joseph Hallman, Becca Sims, Cherie Slider, and others. Purchase a copy today. All proceeds go directly to FNMC. Flute New Music Consortium, Inc. is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Your contributions are tax deductible to the extent allowed by the law. Visit www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com for details. Jessica Rudman's music inspires empathy for social issues through stories of myth, magic, and the modern world. Described as a new music ninja by the Hartford Advocate, she blends lyrical melodies and dramatic narrative structures with sensual harmony and vibrant color to draw the audience into the world she's created. She believes that the ability to reach one's audience is of extreme importance in our current social, economic, and political climate. Highly involved in the new music community as a concert organizer and music educator, Rudman is a co-founder of Teaching Composition, a symposium on music composition pedagogy. She also volunteers with SCI and CMS, as well as the Women Composers Festival of Hartford, where she runs the student workshop. Jessica is currently an assistant professor of composition and theory at the University of Utah. Honors include winning the Riot Ensemble's commissioning competition, the Robert Starer Award, the Boston Metro Opera's Advocacy Award, the College Music Society Student Composer Award, the New Music at ECU Orchestra Composition Competition, and IAWM's Libby Larson Prize. She was a 2019 Connecticut Artist Fellow, and she has also been a fellow in the American Opera Project's Composers and Voice program from 2019 to 2021. Welcome to New Music Crush, Jessica.
Thanks for having me.
Elizabeth and I met you not that long ago at the Music by Women Festival in March of 2023, which is at Mississippi University for Women, right? And that's a festival that's been going on for a little while. It seems like a lot of people go pretty much every year. Have you been a regular at that festival, or was that your first time?
No, that actually was my first time. I had met Julia Mortikova, who organizes the festival, a number of years ago at the Women Composers Festival in Hartford. But this is the first time that I went out to her festival in Mississippi.
Small world. It's always a small world, isn't it? So how was the festival for you? I mean, it's interesting because you've been in both positions, attending and also helping to run the one in Hartford. How was the experience for you in Mississippi?
It was great. It was somewhat of a adventure to get there.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it was fantastic. There was just a ton of really, really wonderful music. It was great to meet new performers and new composers. And the weather was gorgeous. Mm-hmm. And I got to sleep a full night without being awakened by a toddler. So that's also
good. Bonus, yeah. Well, so I had a follow-up question for you, which I guess maybe, that's one of the answers, but why, and this is really a selfish question for me too, because it's something I grapple with a lot. What do you get out of attending festivals? Like, how do you decide which ones to go to, how many to go to? What do you accomplish from attending them?
So as a composer, there's usually a few things that I get out of going to these sorts of events. One is that usually I have a piece performed. So that that sort of helps with the deciding which ones to go to, because it's a lot harder to justify the expense and the time to travel that far if I don't have a piece being performed. As much as I would love to be able to go to all of the different conferences. I'm pretty sure that I would not be married anymore if I kept leaving my daughter alone that much. But so that's one thing is as a composer getting to work with a performer that I haven't met before and have a piece performed. I find it really sort of reinvigorating to be out of daily life and to go for these sort of focused periods of time where you're really just thinking about music and enjoying the artistry of other composers and performers, and getting to have a sense of community with them. And so it's just sort of a really special way to like charge the batteries.
Yeah, that's a great perspective.
One of the first things that Nicole and I both do when we're at festivals and we meet new composers like yourself is look them up to see what they've written for flute. So when we did that to you, we discovered Gaslight Variations, and I want to know everything. Go.
Okay. So Gaslight Variations came about because of a flutist that I was friends with on Twitter posted asking for composers to write pieces for a project, because she had a new flute that was using the Kingma microtonal fingering system. And she had a glissando head joint, and so she wanted pieces that used that setup. And so she was looking for composers who would write pieces with the idea of eventually having performance and an album. I don't think those things came to fruition. So the piece has sort of sat in my drawer for a long time. So if anybody happens to have that setup and wants to wants to see a copy and workshop it with me, that would be great. It sounded like a really cool adventure to try writing for this pretty unique instrument. So I did a lot of research. I talked with the flutist quite a bit. She looked at some drafts, and so now there is a piece that hopefully will someday come to life. The thing that interested me with writing for that setup was sort of the potential for detuning musical materials over time. So musically, what happens is in the piece is that you have some initial material that's presented, and then from using some of the microtonal fingerings and adjusting the position of the head joint, it gets detuned and it gets sort of transformed and made into a more grotesque version of itself very gradually. And so that musical concept sort of seemed to fit very well to me with the idea of gaslighting, where it starts off and your thought process gets transformed so that it's not matching reality. So that's where the title comes from.
Oh, it sounds so interesting. I don't have either of those things, a glissando head joint or a Kingma system flute. Do you, and not being a flutist, I don't blame you if you don't have an answer to this, but whenever I hear about a really cool piece that's not getting performed, I want to help. Do you think that it would work if a person only had the glissando head joint, since there's so much freedom to move?
It might be able to be adapted for that. I would have to look a little bit more closely at it and talk with somebody who is more well versed in what's possible with the glissando head joint. There may be ways to adapt it for that.
All right, so glissando head joint owners, if you're listening. I think that's happening at a more rapid rate than the Kingma system flutes, you know.
So you can see why I haven't been able to find anybody else to do anything with it.
Sounds fascinating though.
It does. Yeah, I'm sad I don't have that set up.
Yeah. You have several other works with equally evocative themes or titles. You've got Mary Curie Learns to Swim, Trigger, A Curious Incident with the Queen, that sound like they're dealing with themes of social injustice or, you know, the ills of our unequal society. Is this a conscious, do whatever you want with this question, honestly, but is this a conscious choice that you have decided at some point in your career to really stake your claim in this way and adopt this kind of persona as a composer? Is it something that just kind of occurred naturally to you, or something in between?
So I guess sort of something in between. I sort of remember pretty vividly a time when I was in graduate school, and one of the composition faculty members when I was at Hart, David McBride, he presented in our composition seminar, and he was somebody who was very big into writing pieces that had to do with what was going on in the world. And I remember when he was presenting sort of thinking like, why would I want to do that? I just want to write music. and not like respecting what he was doing, but not seeing it as the path for myself. But then I sort of realized that everything I was doing was really personal. And as I got more sort of focused on sort of bigger issues outside of myself in the world, it just seemed really natural that those sorts of subjects would make their way into my music, because they were things that I was thinking about a lot otherwise. And with Trigger, I sort of came into that again in sort of a backwards kind of way. It's about domestic violence. It's based on an actual event that happened in Nova Scotia in, I think, 2014. And after I wrote that piece, it just kind of kept going from there, with focusing on different different topics that are challenging to deal with, and challenging to think of what we can do that actually will be meaningful to help make the situations better. And I don't have any answers, but it's sort of me working through my own emotions and my own thought process about my place as a member of society when all of these things are happening that I don't think any of us really want to be happening.
Right. Yeah, it has felt like whiplash the last 5 or 6 years too, just in terms of the scale and number of issues, for lack of a better term, that have presented themselves. Yeah, I remember one morning over breakfast at the festival, at the Music by Women festival, a few of us were sitting and talking about kind of meaning in music, and I think you were the one who had said that you had gotten the advice also to make sure that titles were meaningful, to not, or and kind of matched the meaning of the music, rather than Sonata Number 3 or something like that too.
Yeah, I think somebody else might have been the one that said that, but I agree with it. yeah, I don't specifically remember getting that advice, but it is very good advice.
Yeah, I mean, for me, from a performer's perspective too, I want to do things that are meaningful, but I don't write my own music, and so these are, I mean, these pieces in the catalog are a real gift to so many of us who want to do more than just another academic recital, to kind of go through the motions because we're supposed to do one every year for our students or something, but to really find things that you can say that are meaningful on stage to your audience. I think more and more of us are very appreciative for that and really looking for that. Flute players love thinking of ourselves as singers. Have you noticed this, Elizabeth? There's this long history of us, talking about how similar flute and voice are. And I don't know how much that comes off to the outside world, but I do notice as a flute player that you've written a lot for voice, including multiple operas. And so I was wondering if, as a non-flutist, if you see connections between flute and voice, either when you're writing for flute or just as a listener, and if so, what does that mean to you as a composer?
Yeah, I definitely see connections between flute and voice. I mean, the use of breath and phrasing, and the potential for expressivity. I see a lot of similarities in terms of what you can do with them. I mean, obviously with voice, there's a lot more of an emphasis on text than there is in most flute music. But I think aside from that, I think there is a really strong connection. I have one of the pieces that I've written for voice is a large song cycle for mezzo soprano and either a small chamber orchestra or a large chamber ensemble, depending on what you want to call it. And it's on my mind because we're going to be recording it in June, and so I've been revising all the parts. But there's a lot of interplay between the voice and the flute, and also the other wind instruments. Flute in particular in the first movement sort of foreshadows and responds to what's happening with the voice, like sort of another character almost.
Oh, cool. So what is this piece that you're about to record, so we can go find it too?
So it's called Isolde Speaks. It's based on the Tristan and Isolde myth, and it's based on a set of poems by a poet named Elizabeth Hamilton. And she wrote these really, really gorgeous texts that are from Isolde's point of view, and sort of looking at the myth, but from a place of more omniscience. So there's some historical references that obviously would not be appropriate for the myth if you were being strict about it, and she has a little more knowledge of the situation than a character would in the midst of the story. But it's really sort of focusing on personal agency, and on gender roles and how the events affect her and Tristan differently. And it's just, it's a wonderful, wonderful set of texts. And I'm really thrilled to be working with the singer and the ensemble. And
that sounds amazing. I'll add this to the show notes so we can all go look for the poems as well. Are you just constantly on the prowl? Are you constantly reading things for more text material for compositions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not always doing it actively. It usually happens very passively because I have the American Academy of Poets has like a poem of the day, for example, where they will send it out by email and post it on their social media. So I follow that, and I have other sorts of things set up like that where I'm just sort of being exposed to different poetry a lot, and so I just sort of put it into a folder when I see something that I want to work with eventually. And so if I have a project and I need to look for a text, then I'll have a repository of things to go back through. Sometimes I have an idea, and then we'll talk to somebody, one of the writers that I work with, usually Kendra Preston Leonard, and she might write something new. She did that for a choral piece that I wrote a few years ago, called A Forest That Is a Desert. And then she's going to be writing a new text for a potential voice and flute piece.
Oh,
cool. Well, keep us posted about that. That's a hot tip. I'm gonna go see if I can get some poems sent to me. That sounds amazing. We previously mentioned, I guess we've previously mentioned that you also have quite a lot of experience as a concert organizer. What have you learned about the process from that end, from that role, and then how does that affect your experiences when you participate or spectate at other people's events?
Well, I have to like calm my inner backseat driver.
Oh no.
Yeah.
But I do also, I think, have a special appreciation when things go smoothly at events. I mean, I like to think it makes me a little easier to work with because I have an idea of what goes into putting together a concert or a festival or a conference or things like that. I can be more understanding and more helpful and try not to do things that will drive the organizers crazy. It also gave me sort of a appreciation for programming and for thinking about how pieces go together,
Sure.
In terms of subject matter, in terms of theme, and also in terms of sort of the overall arc of the experience of listening to all of the pieces on a concert. And so sometimes as a composer, it's worth thinking about, do I want this to be a piece that would be a good opener or a good closer, or does that not really matter? And also practical considerations of, well, if I write a 40-minute piece, it's going to be really hard to program,
right?
Unless you can excerpt it. So some of those sorts of practical considerations make their way more into my artistic choices or artistic thinking when I'm composing or planning pieces.
Do you think you got a lot of advice from your mentors about sort of practical considerations when composing, or has that been learned through the School of Hard Knocks?
I think some of both. I definitely had a teacher who was very sort of practical about notation and making sure that your intentions are really clear and making sure everything looks professional, and so that you minimize any possible questions and don't make it so that players or ensembles waste rehearsal time trying to figure out what it is that you mean, things like that. Or like, okay, well, if you're gonna use a second harp in the orchestra, nobody's going to want to program it because they're not going to want to pay a second harpist.
Right.
So yeah, I think I did get practical advice when it came up in the course of lessons or classes, but you can't cover everything. And so there's always going to be things that you learn through experience.
I live in South Dakota, so it's a more sparsely populated area. And so I find that I live more deeply entrenched in the practical than a lot of composers that I interact with who, maybe live in a major metropolitan area on a coast. And I'm always interested, like, as a person who is doing the creating rather than the programming, how do you balance sort of, these are the things I want with, like, these are the things that exist in the world where I live? Like, how do you balance the practical and the creative?
Well, I'm almost always writing for specific people and specific projects.
That probably helps.
So from sort of like the get-go, there's usually a pretty clearly defined set of what's possible and what's okay and what's not for this project.
Sure.
I think that helps. I'm also pretty pragmatic, where I want people to hear my music. I want it to get performed. So if I have a piece that's for a less common instrumentation, then I may make a version of it that's for a more common instrumentation. there's very few things where I'm not willing to adapt it.
Sure.
And that's only if adapting it would take away like the fundamental nature of the piece.
Sure.
I'm not really from the school of this is my vision. Everybody else must figure out how to make it happen. I feel like, okay, I have this intention, and how can we work together to make sure that we are realizing it in the best possible way? I guess I feel more collaborative rather than like being in charge.
It sounds pretty rooted in the pragmatic too, if you're largely working with specific performers for specific performances.
Also, I can't imagine writing, you know, some very obscure instrument combination for no one and no promise of it getting played. I mean, that just seems like a real waste of your time and energy, most likely.
You're right. Yeah. I mean, there were some things that I wrote as a student that were sort of weird instrumental combinations because they had an ensemble that did that. Yeah, but unless somebody is commissioning me to do something like that, I don't generally have like this burning need that I have to create a piece for I don't know what would be like really obscure, like didgeridoo and electric guitar, and I don't know what else.
English horn.
English horn. The ideas that I have for pieces are usually more general and more abstract than that. A concept can be realized in different ways. It's not tied to necessarily certain concrete things most of the time.
Jessica, you've also taught for a long time, right? Mm-hmm. So you've taught everything from pre-college through graduate level. You can take this question for whatever group of students you wish, but I'm wondering what you most hope to accomplish with your students right now, currently, and if your pedagogical philosophy has changed over time from your experiences or from the way the world is.
Yeah, I would definitely say that my approach to teaching has changed over time. In sort of the early years when I was teaching composition, I was pretty focused on theory. I moved away from that. I mean, I still love theory and I still teach theory, and I still incorporate it into my composition teaching, but I do it in a different way now, where it's coming from creative motivations. So the students are trying to do X. So what tools can I introduce that will help them to do what they're trying to do, as opposed to, well, let me teach you why and you go play around with it. I mean, it depends on the class too. Some, you know, in group classes versus lessons are much more based on the students' individual projects and goals, whereas the different group classes, they have a different subject. They have different things that you are supposed to teach. I'm going to introduce you to this, and here's some ways you can use it. But I really focus on trying to get my students to think about their intentions and what they want to accomplish in a piece, whether it's to express something, or whether it's to try certain musical things. But I really try to get them to think deeply about what it is they want their music to do, and then how can they achieve that.
I think that's great advice for those of us teaching in performance studios too. I don't know that as a student I ever got asked my opinion of what I wanted to do, or you know, what I was trying to accomplish on flute, or what I wanted to play. It was just, all right, here's where you are now, here's what we're going to do to fix you some more. And I don't think that's very compelling to students anymore. And that's reasonable, you know, if students are coming in with things that really inspire them, that does seem like a smarter way to create a core to your philosophy.
Well, and it's so interesting for performers because your interpretation and what you bring to a piece is what differentiates you from other musicians. It's pretty far along before you get to think about that.
Right. Yeah.
Before it's worked into your learning process.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of inspiration, our last question that we love to ask everybody is, what are 3 pieces you're listening to now?
I have been listening to a lot of Coco Melon. Again,
Say more.
Oh, well, yeah, for anyone who does not have kids, or does not regularly spend time around young children, Coco Melon is these cartoons that they do like different kids songs.
Awesome.
And they're very addictive for kids. And my daughter is obsessed with them. So I'm listening to a lot of that right now. Yeah, to be honest, I've been listening to a lot of that, and I've been listening to a lot of my students' pieces because we're at the end of this semester, and so we've had a lot of end of semester concerts and portfolio reviews and all of those things. So I haven't actually been having a lot of pleasure listening time. So I don't know if you want me to maybe say some pieces that I like or something.
Well, if it sounds like you've shared a pretty accurate picture of where you are right now. Do you have a couple of things you would like to be listening to when school settles down?
So I'm looking ahead to that sort of potential flute and voice piece, and so I would like to sort of do a deep dive into pieces for that combination. I know Kate Soper has a really wonderful piece. And I'm just curious to see what else is out there.
Is your voice soprano?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's a Roussel I did like a million years ago that was really beautiful.
Well, that's fun. So a little bit of flute and soprano research. You got anything else that's kind of on your musical diet wish list?
Well, no. Actually, I would like to get to know the music of Rhiannon Giddens.
Oh yeah.
More.
I've been seeing that name a lot. Yeah.
Because she just won the Pulitzer.
Well, that's usually our last question, but can I ask another one? So you're working on recording right now, which is very exciting. Do you have any other big performances of your works or recordings that are in the hopper for the next year or so that we should keep our eyes peeled for?
Well, the recording project that I'm doing in June, there is a performance associated with it. I'm working with the Hartford Independent Chamber Orchestra, and they're going to be performing Isolde Speaks, which is it's a really big piece. It's like 40 minutes long, along with a clarinet concerto.
Oh,
nice.
So that's sort of the next big thing on the horizon. And hopefully those recordings will eventually be released on an album, but we're in the early stages and don't have a label or anything like that yet.
Sure.
Other big things, there's a few in sort of early planning stages where we're waiting to hear about grant funding.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I'm supposed to hear back about one of the grants tomorrow, so fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
But hopefully at some point in the proximate future, we'll be workshopping more of my in-progress opera Protectress, which has text by Kendra Preston Leonard, who I mentioned earlier. And more collaborations.
Nice. Life sounds very exciting for you. I look forward to continuing to follow you online and listen to these things as they come out.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Well, thanks, Jessica, for joining us. It was really great getting to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
And happy summer break.
Yay. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com.